Good evening, everybody, and welcome. I'm Elaine Bedell. I'm the Chief Executive of the Southbank Centre, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this very special event this evening. And thank you very much for your patience in trying to get everybody in. As you know, we had extra security this evening, so thank you very much for bearing with us. Tonight is one of the highlights of our Planet Summer, a season of talks, performances and events taking place across the Southbank site, responding to the climate emergency. And never has it felt more relevant and so pressing as in these last few weeks. Tonight, we're going to hear from an amazing group of young climate leaders who are at the forefront of calling for change. They are Tori Tsui, Dominique Palmer, Daphne Frias, Mya-Rose, Aedy Viviam Villafaña, and of course, Greta Thunberg, who we're delighted to welcome back following her inspirational keynote address that you saw in that film in this hall last year. And the conversation will be chaired by documentary filmmaker and campaigner Aedy. This roundtable first gathered at the New York Times Climate Hub during COP26 in 2021, and it reconvenes this evening ahead of COP28 later this year to discuss what action we need to see from our world leaders. Planet Summer takes its inspiration from our Hayward Gallery exhibition, Dear Earth, a group artist show which inspires us all to make change together and address the challenges of the climate crisis. Southbank Centre's own commitment to addressing the crisis extends well beyond what you'll see on our stages and in the Hayward Gallery this summer. As part of an ongoing endeavour to become a more sustainable organisation, we've set a target to be totally net zero by 2040. We've already achieved a 42% reduction of our baseline, with only 8% to go before reaching our 2025 target, including real progress, for example, in working with our bars and restaurants on site to transform our food waste into energy. But we operate in beautiful but historic venues, and the challenges to making, for example, this Grade 1 listed hall with its huge glass windows and its 1950s engineering, making that carbon zero is very challenging and extremely costly. And we need real investment to make this a reality, and we are pleading with government to help us do that. But we are very determined, and we will get there. To close Planet Summer, on Sunday the 3rd of September, we're also collaborating with Culture Declares Emergency, and the Claw Ballroom will become a town hall for conversation and community building in a kind of cultural assembly. We're inviting key stakeholders to join with the public in sharing experiences and exploring how we can respond to the current state of our climate and ecology. So do please also join us for that event. As part of making this evening's event accessible, I'd like to thank Paul and Darren for BSL interpreting, and to Ewan for very speedy live captioning. We'd also like to thank Cecilia and Worldly Wise and their support with Aedy for consecutive interpretation on stage. Copies of relevant books from tonight's speakers will be available from our partner Foyles down on the ballroom floor after the event. But for now, please join me in welcoming our speakers to the stage. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. This is going to horribly embarrass them because they are so painfully humble. But I hear there's more than 2,000 people in the auditorium, so I'm going to invite you to give another round of applause to this incredible group of activists, please. Man, do they deserve that. My name is Aedy. I'm a filmmaker and co-founder of Earthrise, an impact-driven media company for climate, and I've spent years telling human stories from climate front lines. Thank you so much, Southbank, for having us and for providing some brilliant audience questions that will be woven through this conversation. I think I can speak for all of us. We're incredibly grateful to be here tonight, and I can't help feel how poignant it is to be having this conversation today. The hottest July ever recorded. Extreme weather events escalating globally at an unprecedented pace. And the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, announcing just days ago, the era of global warming has ended, and the era of global boiling has arrived. If that doesn't send a chill down your spine, I don't know what will. All the while, fossil fuel companies are making record profits. It goes without saying that the current situation is indefensible. But this group of extraordinary climate justice activists are at the forefront of the fight to preserve our planet. They've committed their lives to this fight with courage and determination. They have truth and morality on their side, and luckily, they have each other, and they show no sign of backing down. Tori, Dominique, Daphne, Mya-Rose, Greta, Aedy, Viviam, thank you so much for being here. Daphne, I want to come to you to introduce yourself, share how you got into climate activism, and also tell us, how does it feel to be reunited with this incredible group 2 years on?
Sure. Well, first I have to say it feels like summer camp. Truly being with your best friends once again. I cannot believe it's been 2 years since we were first together. My name is Daphne Frias, and I am a disability justice activist working on the intersection of the climate crisis and gun violence prevention. 3 issues that on the surface may not seem overtly connected, but they are inextricably linked by the fact that these groups face systemic oppression. And my work really aims to be a human megaphone for the voices of my community. I am a fiercely proud, disabled Latina. I love all of my identities and who I am and the languages that I speak. And in this work, unfortunately, I have not seen myself and my communities reflected far enough. Growing up in West Harlem is a beautiful community full of the diaspora of Black and brown people from all over the world. Growing up, I experienced fluctuations of environmental racism my whole life, and it wasn't until I went to high school in a predominantly white institution that I realized what I was experiencing in my neighborhood was vastly different than what many folks in areas of high socioeconomic status were experiencing. Having to go 15 minutes to a grocery store to get fruits and vegetables that actually look the color that fruits and vegetables are supposed to look like, having meat on the shelves that isn't already expired, and then not to mention the overwhelming impacts of gentrification on these neighborhoods. And for me, growing up in a Latina community, I saw the ferocity of many individuals working hard every single day to make ends meet. But in that ferocity was also silence and fear, because a lot of times we are taught to just be grateful for what we have, because we've already faced so many hardships along the way. And being grateful simply wasn't enough for me anymore. I wanted to use our voices to cause a revolution. My mission statement reads, "Words are the building blocks of revolutions." I believe with our words, the words of this amazing panel, we can make anything possible. With your words, you can make anything possible. And I hope that in this space today, we get to fill this beautiful auditorium with words that shake the ground and move your heart. Because love is really at the core of this movement. Love is the reason why we're all here together. And love for our planet is what's going to keep us moving forward. So I'm so honored to open our beautiful panel, and thank you for being here with us.
Greta, your activism has brought you out into the streets, protesting, you've been in court, you've been arrested, speaking to the media, appearing at events, and that is just this week. this Friday. Yeah, seriously, literally. This Friday was your 258th protest. What keeps you coming out every single week?
It was not my 258th protest. I've done way more than that, but it was the 258th week of protests. I guess what it boils down to ultimately is this sense of there is no other option than to do this. I've been very privileged in my life. I've never experienced the first-hand consequences of the climate crisis. But when I started to learn more about it and see what others all over the world are experiencing when it comes to the climate crisis, knowing that this is not just something that's got to do with polar bears or melting glaciers, it's actually all around us everywhere. That made me realize that this is extremely, extremely serious, and then I realized that I can actually do something about it. We all can do something about it, and I think we all underestimate our own abilities to do something about it. I think that's one of the main challenges that we are facing, that we don't realize the power that we have. The sense of powerlessness is a very strong currency, because as long as we feel that we can't make a difference, the people in power benefit from that, because then their place in power is not being threatened. So as soon as we understand that, and as soon as we start to reclaim that power, I think that we can really start to shake things up, and that's what we are trying to do. And I also want to be able to, in the future, to look back and say that I did everything I possibly could during these extremely decisive years and months. It is what we do now that will define the future of all of humanity. Yeah, and also, as Daphne said, love for the planet, love for my fellow activists and for everyone fighting to save what still is to be saved.
Tori, on the note of wanting to be able to say that you've tried everything that you can, you've been years you've been campaigning for climate justice. When you were on stage at the New York Times at COP26, you shared a big rallying cry for the Stop Cambo campaign. Can you tell us about the past 2 years, what's happened with that campaign and what's happening since?
Yes, thank you, Alice. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tori Tsui, and I am a climate justice activist with the Stop Rosebank Coalition, previously Stop Cambo. And I really have to just reiterate that all of us here really do stand on the shoulders of our communities that often get invisibilized in this fight. We can't do this work alone. And I had a really nice discussion with a friend the other day about how much of our activism is actually really unglamorous and can be really boring and so mundane, but that's the stuff that it takes, you know, it takes all of that effort. Everybody in this room has a role. And I do want to go back to Stop Cambo because I think it's a really significant moment. And as you mentioned, 2 years ago when we were in Glasgow, we campaigned to Stop Cambo. And so we ran this huge public pressure campaign against the Cambo oil field. And for those who don't know it, Cambo was a huge proposed offshore oil project in the North Sea that was to be developed by Shell. And following months of escalating pressure up and down the country, Shell eventually pulled out of the project in December 2021. And a year and a half later, I sit here and I can say that Cambo has still not gone ahead. And that is 170 million barrels of oil that have not been extracted and burned because of us. That is the power of the climate justice movement in the UK.
Sorry. You should put that on your CV. Is it on your CV? Because that's pretty badass.
It should be on quite a lot of people's CVs. But it does sadden me to also say that the fight is not over, and now we have an even bigger challenge on our hands. The UK government, along with Norwegian state-owned oil giant Equinor, want to open the biggest undeveloped oil field in the North Sea, the Rosebank oil field. Rosebank is 3 times the size of Cambo, at a whopping 500 million barrels of oil. If the oil and gas of this project is extracted and burned, it will create more CO2 than 28 entire countries combined. Yet our government is saying that this will give us energy security, and it will do nothing for energy security. It won't lower our energy bills, in fact. And the UK government wants to hand over £3.75 billion in tax breaks to Equinor for just going ahead with the project. And that will mean that taxpayers here in the UK will pay 91% of the costs of developing this field. In this moment, as you've mentioned, Alice, there are fires raging across the world. This is the hottest summer our planet has ever recorded. All the while, our energy security and net zero minister, Grant Shapps, says that we need to max out the North Sea's oil and gas reserves. Rosebank is a death sentence. And I think for a lot of us here in the global north, we might feel like these issues are maybe distant, but this will affect all of us. And I implore you to think about how this will impact you as well. But we stopped Cambo, and we can and we will stop Rosebank. We have won before, and we can do it again. But we can't do it without each and every one of you sitting in this room tonight. And you can be part of our victory.
Strap in for the ride. Yes,
Can I jump in on Tori's
Of course you can.
remark? You know, Tori said it takes all of us, right? And coming from New York, right? I don't live in the UK, and Rosebank will not invade my home or my land. But one climate injustice somewhere is climate injustice everywhere. And I think it is individualism that kills the climate spirit. And 2 days ago, I had the privilege of joining Stop Rosebank campaigners. And it was one of the most inclusive experiences I've had as a climate organizer for the last 6 years. My transportation was arranged. Even the paths that we took to get to our protest site were carefully mapped out to make sure it was safe for me to navigate. Even making sure that the way that we were communicating our message was inclusive of all people and all bodies. And it really shouldn't be so few and far between. This should be the norm within climate justice organizing and social justice everywhere. All justice is disability justice. And if you're not including the voices of disabled people in your organizing, what are you really organizing for? And if the environmental justice movement can be inclusive of that, so can all movements. And I think what's really powerful is, obviously we know that it's going to take all of us to solve this crisis. And it really gave me hope, and hope is a word that you're going to hear a lot in this conversation, right? It really gave me hope that we can come together as a community. So if Stop Rosebank can be inclusive, we can all be inclusive.
Thanks, Daphne. Dominique, you're one of the activists fighting every single day to make those movements more inclusive. Can you share how you got into climate activism?
Thank you, Alice. So, for those who don't know me, my name is Dominique Palmer and I am a climate justice activist. And one of my focuses is on intersectionality in the climate movement and also in ensuring that climate policy does not leave people behind. As was mentioned by Daphne, all of these injustices are so interlinked, and we have to make sure that what we demand then shapes policy and it shapes action. So it's so important to make sure that that includes vulnerable communities and marginalized communities. And for me, the reason that I actually became involved in climate activism was I was living in South London at the time, in Lewisham, and I discovered how my community was being disproportionately impacted by air pollution. And I was speaking to parents around the local community about how concerned they were about their children growing up with stunted lung growth due to air pollution. And this was also the same place that the court ruled that Ella Kissy Deborah died due to air pollution. And this is something that really made me realize that the climate crisis is here, and also that environmental issues are so interconnected. And growing up as a young black girl in London, I also didn't really see myself as an environmentalist. And I didn't see nature spaces as something that was for me or places that I quite belonged. And there's a groundwork org report that showed that communities of colour often lack access to quality nature spaces. And intersectionality is so important to have at the heart of the movement, but we first need to understand what is intersectionality and why diversified perspectives are so important. And this is because it's in line with climate justice. So in short, climate justice is acknowledging that the systems of oppression and the system that we exist in, the climate crisis, is so interconnected and so inextricably linked to social injustices. And as Audre Lorde says, a great quote is that there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not lead single issue lives. And actually, inequalities fuel the climate crisis and mean that people disproportionately face the impacts of this. And when it comes to the crisis, we may all be in the same storm, but we are not all in the same boat. And this is across so many different issues. For example, the UN stated that 80% of climate refugees are women, and that is because of barriers that are faced. And globally, communities of colour are most likely to live in areas that are most impacted by the crisis. And this inequality and legacies of colonialism and extractivism continues to dictate who is allocated the resources to mitigate the crisis and who is left to bear the consequences of it. But communities of colour all across the world have first-hand experience, knowledge, and education that is so vital to the movement, and it is so important that we are genuinely included and that they are genuinely included in shaping campaigns, in shaping policy, and in decision-making spaces. Because having diversified perspectives actually leads to solutions, such as bridging the gap between accessibility and nature, and working on the unequal impacts of air pollution and living near toxic waste sites, and making sure that climate policy doesn't leave anyone behind, that doesn't leave vulnerable and marginalized communities behind. But also, and this is something picking up on that Daphne said, there's actually so much that a lot of the movement can learn from marginalized communities that have had no other choice but to believe that another world is possible, to believe that better is possible, and to fight for it. And that hope is something that is created and it is built. And communities of colour, the LGBTQ plus chosen families, disabled communities, so many marginalised communities have so much experiences in cultivating a culture of care, in creating resilience and resistance, and cultivating joy. And there's actually so much that can be learnt and that can be applied to the wider climate movement. And it is so important, more now than ever, that we are all standing up for climate justice. And it's something that we truly can all do. And I believe that because these systems of oppression that we face were made by people, they can be dismantled by people, and we can do that. And we do have the power in all of us to make sure that we secure a safe future, which is also just and equitable for all of us.
Maya, I want to come to you next because I know you're equally passionate on these themes. You have a long list of accolades, so long it's practically a dictionary. I did want to pick up on one of them, which is that at 17, you were the youngest Briton ever to be awarded an honorary doctorate of science. That is so cool. What? So in 2022, you wrote a foreword to the joint report published by Runnymede Trust and Greenpeace called Confronting Injustices, Racism and the Environmental Emergency. It was followed by a video that basically went viral. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first to give context, thank you, by the way, that was really lovely.
Ridiculous.
I think firstly for context, I'll just explain a little bit of my activism journey, because I have been doing campaigning and activism for 10 years now. I was 11 years old when I did my first campaign, and I look back at that 11-year-old girl, and she was someone who was extremely angry, deeply, deeply upset about the state of the world, and who was of an age where she had never known anything but the very harsh reality of the planet and the future of the planet. And so I think as well as that, I'm half Bangladeshi, and I think it's well known now that Bangladesh is one of the worst countries in the world when it comes to the effects of climate change. And I had seen firsthand through my family who live in various villages in the countryside, the terrible effects of climate change through flooding and drought, and the terrible weather patterns and the way that people were being affected. And I think all of that made it feel like an issue that I had to do something about. And it all came to a head when there was this terrible oil spill in Bangladesh, that was terrible in that it was affecting the people who lived in mangrove forests. It was affecting the forests that were one of the last places where the Bengal tiger lives in the world. It was a really big deal, and I remember waiting for the Western media to pick up that story and for it to make all the headlines and for people to go crazy. And it was not talked about in the UK, in America, and anywhere. And so I think that was the first time I realized that people didn't really seem to care about things happening on the other side of the world, that they did, that they weren't being confronted with. And so I took it upon myself to write articles to tell people about what was going on. And in the end, we managed to raise about $35,000, and it did change that. And I think as a young woman of color, sort of learning the lesson that I could be the change that I wanted to see, I think that that was really, really important. And I'm sure all of us have had that moment at some point. And since then, I have been not only a climate activist, but also, I would say, an anti-racism activist who, one of my greatest priorities is intersectionality within the climate justice movement, as Domi has talked about. And in terms of the Runnymede report, it was, in some ways, a really big deal in that activists had been saying for years about how climate was an intersectional issue, how it is related to other social issues such as racism, such as colonial legacies. And this was the report that finally had sort of solidified that into almost something academic, something scientific. And within it, it was explaining how essentially climate change is a form of neocolonialism, in that you have lots and lots of Western nations who wanted to industrialize, wanted to make lots of money, but didn't have the resources to do so. And so we're going into countries that were very rich in resources, such as, places in South America, Africa, Asia, plundering that, using that to create wealth, but also the impact of that wealth being terrible environmental impacts around the world. And so there is this sort of colonial racial aspect to climate that I think for a very long time has gone unacknowledged, partially because the environmental movement has historically been so incredibly Western and white and middle class that no one had even, I suppose, realized that in the first place. And so reports like this basically are incredibly important in terms of creating a future that is, just and fair, but also, environmental activists talk a lot about a just transition. That's a phrase that we throw around a lot. And it's this idea that it's not just this utopian future that we're working towards where the planet is cared for and people are cared for, but actually that we are actively now making sure that we are caring for the most vulnerable people in society and around the world, and acknowledging the fact that environmental issues also ripple out and link to gendered issues, social issues, racial issues, and it's basically making sure that we're doing everything we can to bring everything forward with us, because otherwise, you know, Domi mentioned lots of different boats in a terrible, terrible storm, and if we're not careful, it's a very small group of people who are very wealthy and very Western who are going to be the only people to come out of this happy and healthy.
Aedy, Viviam, at COP26 you were representing your people, the Arhuaco people of the Sierra Nevada. Can you share with us why it's so crucially important to involve Indigenous voices at climate negotiations like these, and share a bit about what you've been doing over the past 2 years since COP26?
Admi bezanuko nande Santa Marta Pari naknukwin Aedy Navanin. Hola, ¿cómo están? Mi nombre es Aedy Viviam Mislin Villafaña Izquierdo. Pertenezco al pueblo arhuaco de la Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. Creo que en estas luchas, cuando se escucha y se pronuncia y se entiende desde otro lenguaje, ese lenguaje empieza a cobrar vida. Y por eso creo que es importante que exista esta representación.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Aedy Viviam Villafaña Izquierdo, and I come from the Arhuaco people in Sierra Nevada in Santa Marta. And I think that in this fight, when we start listening and inviting different languages, those languages come alive. And I believe this is why it's important that we incorporate them to this conversation.
La Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, ubicada al norte de Colombia, se entiende como el corazón del mundo, es el lugar de donde vengo. Fue declarado Patrimonio Cultural Inmaterial por la UNESCO este año, precisamente por todo el sistema de conocimientos ancestrales que ve que existe y que es posible en la Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta.
The Sierra Nevada, Santa Marta, which is where I come from, in the north of Colombia, is considered to be the heart of the world. And this year, it was recognized as intangible cultural heritage by UNESCO, precisely because the ancestral knowledge and wisdom that our people have.
Y quiero que es importante decir algo que pareciera irrelevante o quizás no tuviera conexión, y es, en 1991, hace 32 años, se reconoce por primera vez en Colombia, y digo, vamos, una dinámica igual pasa en la región, que los pueblos indígenas que le habitan tienen calidad humana y por tanto tienen capacidad de gestionar sus propios territorios. Este reconocimiento vino hace 32 años, por eso es tan importante que yo hoy esté aquí, no en calidad de participante ni en calidad distinta, sino poder compartir, porque se equipara y se reconoce que hay una voz latente e importante que escuchar.
And something that is very important that I would like to share with you that might seem irrelevant or even unrelated to this is that in 1991, that is 30 years ago, for the first time in Colombia, as well as in different other regions, the indigenous people were recognized as having human quality and the capacity to manage their own territories. That's why I believe it's important for me to be here, not just as a mere panelist, but also as a representative of this, being able to share this experience with you.
Y ya con un ejercicio de entender lo valioso que son los pueblos indígenas y que además tienen esta calidad humana, me es apremiante y nos es apremiante poder participar en espacios como la COP26, que fue la primera COP a la que asistí.
And just as an exercise of how valuable indigenous peoples are, not only in our human quality, is being able to participate in these spaces, such as, for example, 2 years ago at COP26.
Y para graficarlo, quienes no estén familiarizados con la COP, un espacio donde alrededor de 200 países firmantes de un acuerdo que busca precisamente reducir las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero para hacer un planeta mejor, para hacerlo habitable. Y esas negociaciones llevan ya hace mucho tiempo. Reúne alrededor de 20,000 personas que precisamente abogan porque estas cosas sean una realidad, compromisos que muchas veces quedan en el papel. Si nuestras esperanzas están puestas ahí, habremos perdido mucho tiempo, y creo que eso es un mensaje que tiene que quedar claro, y eso ha sido también parte de la participación que hemos hecho en ese espacio.
So to give you an idea, and for those of you who are not familiar with it, COP26 is a space where 200 underwriting countries are making decisions on lowering emissions and building a better planet. But these are about roughly 20,000 people who work to make this a reality and not something that is simply written on paper. If we put all our hopes in this space, then I would say that we are just wasting our time. And I think that's the key message as well.
En esta búsqueda de involucrar las voces de los pueblos indígenas hay un riesgo muy grande, y es que se reproduzcan las ideas del tokenismo, la representación simbólica sin mayor efectividad. Yo creo que ese es un reto para quienes lo queremos hacer bien e involucrar estas voces. Implica un doble esfuerzo. ¿Qué he estado haciendo estos 2 años? Producto de esa participación, nos dimos cuenta que existe una amplia subrepresentación en estos espacios de poder, donde muchas veces las juventudes de pueblos indígenas quedan relegadas. Por eso iniciamos junto a Clara, que debe estar en el público, ojalá levantara la mano para que también es un esfuerzo conjunto. Clara, Alicia, Azul y yo iniciamos un proyecto llamado Latin American Youth Climate Scholarship, un proyecto que reúne 12 jóvenes de América Latina que se identifican como personas de comunidades indígenas, comunidades negras, personas de color, y entendemos que su participación en la COP28 este año tiene que lograrse precisamente para que sean sus realidades las que tengan espacio y tengan fuerza en esos espacios.
And that's why I also believe that inviting the voice of Indigenous peoples to these spaces runs the risk of tokenism, just mere symbolic representation without any real consequences. Therefore, we realized over the last 2 years that we need to make an extra effort, because we believe, and I see, that there is underrepresentation of the Indigenous communities in spaces of power. And that's why, together with Clara, who's in the audience, and I hope she would raise her hand so you could see her, Alicia and Azul, we started an organization called Latin American Youth Climate Scholarships, which is a group of 12 youth from Latin America, from Indigenous, Black, and Color communities, who are going to COP28, hoping to make all this a reality.
Y eso es lo que he hecho estos 2 años. He dedicado mi vida precisamente a considerar que es de especial relevancia que los pueblos indígenas tengan espacio y voz en estos lugares de negociación. Más adelante podríamos profundizar, pero es parte del ejercicio.
And what have I been doing over the last 2 years? Well, I've been working to make sure that Indigenous people have a relevant voice in these spaces of power where decisions and negotiations are made.
So I've been lucky to get the chance to spend the past couple of days with you guys, and I'm telling you, the schedule is relentless, ruthless. I don't know how they have the stamina. It is incredible. But it's also given me a sense of the endless set of conversations that you have, and often with the same questions. So I wanted to ask you, and this can go to anyone on the panel who wants to respond, what is the single most annoying question you get asked as a climate activist?
What gives you hope? Okay. I don't mean to kind of trivialize the question, because I think a lot of the time people do cling on to it, but I think far too often it does capitalize on our youth and make us forfeit our youth in order to be tokenized and trivialized. I think people look to us and place an insurmountable pressure on our shoulders without actually joining the fight. And I think far too often we individualize this crisis and we look at, each other and go, oh, well, they'll do the work. They'll save us. Look at them leading the charge. without actually seeing our own fates tied to those who are dispossessed. And I feel like far too often what gives me hope is a sort of question that really tries to water down the action that we need to take. I think a lot of people are afraid, and I never want to discredit or undermine that, but this is really serious. And I am just absolutely baffled by people who look at what's happening around the world, what's happening this summer, for instance, and think that this is okay and that we can continue with business as usual, because we can't. We literally can't. So instead of what gives me hope, I want people to ask, I'm ready, how can I join?
Definitely. I mean, I find this isn't quite a question, but it's the statement of speaking and then being told, you young people, you are going to save the world. Like, it is down to you. And like, thank you, young people, for doing everything that needs to be done. And I think, as you mentioned, there's this tendency to individualize what's happening or place people on pedestals, especially young people, or see them as some kind of heroes. But actually, when we look at anything that has ever changed history, it hasn't been because of a few exceptional individuals, but it's been because of an intergenerational movement of people, but also just millions of normal people standing up or rising up and doing something. And that is what's so powerful in not looking to activists or young people as the one solution, in seeing that, in seeing all of us in a movement, because that is what we need.
I would say also, like, we just want to be young people. We want to be able to reclaim our youth. And I think a lot of the pressure with that question is that we must have all the answers of how to solve the climate crisis. I mean, I'm on stage with only 7 nails on my hands. Like, I don't know what's going on. I really don't. I'm just trying my best, and we're all just trying our best. And I think my hope would be to turn that question back around. Do you not find hope in yourself? Why does hope have to be this sort of out-of-body existential feeling? It can grow within you. It lives within you. I think it's also, like Dami said, we get all this praise thrown at us, and then it's kind of like everyone has climate amnesia after that. Everyone just forgets about all the things we said. And as I've said before, I'm not here to promote climate amnesia. I don't think any of us are. So if you really think that we're that inspirational, support us by showing up and doing the work as well.
Yeah. I think also, like, they've all hit the nail on the head, but I think also, like, as a specific question, one that I've gotten quite a lot that I find bizarre is sort of questioning whether or not I have, like, anger or resentment towards older generations for, like, giving us, like, you know, this terrible planet. And I think there's so many things within that. And I think, there's, you know, just this narrative of almost, like, pitting the generations against each other, like, you know, like, sending young people off to fight older people. And it's like, no, it's not that. It wasn't people driving their cars a bit too much 30 years ago that has given us this situations. It's corporate greed and, you know, terrible economic decisions, terrible government decisions that are all motivated by money. And so I think to frame it as older people handing over this, you know, terrible destroyed planet is a terrible narrative, as well as, you know, the fact that, you know, they're our parents, they're not dead. And I think just in general, this narrative of sort of handing over the planet, I find really difficult, because it's not like, it's not stages. We're not going one after the other. We're all living together. And like the others have said, this is a totally communal movement where all generations all over the world must work together to, you know, create the change that we want to see. And so it feels kind of like dividing and conquering in a way I really don't like.
To be fair, Maya, your parents are exceptionally cool. We did get the chance to meet them, and I think they might be an exception to the rule. Anyone else on incredibly annoying questions?
Actually, yes, and I'm going to say this in English because I think it's really funny. The question is, are you Greta of Colombia? And I mean, hey, I mean, no offense. Your work is really impressive. But it's annoying in the sense of, I mean, you are an icon, you are very important, and I think this fight is for everyone in every sector of the people, and I think ahorita lo hago en español porque ya ahorita se me acaba el inglés y ya no va a poder. And I think we have to facing it from our ya se me acabó. Espacios de enunciación, nuestros espacios de enunciación, y hay luchas muy particulares. Entonces, creo que es bueno reconocer que esta lucha supera estas dimensiones de generar una identidad y que es allí donde tiene lugar. Y hay múltiples caras de las personas que están haciendo estas luchas, y yo creo que eso es importante. Pero en todo caso, estoy muy orgullosa que exista asociación, pero hay particularidades que hay que reconocer.
Just to switch to Spanish lately. So I believe that in all these multiple spaces, there are specific struggles that are particular to each of these spaces. And there's this tendency to create identities and build around them, when actually the reality is the opposite. There are many different faces to all of this, and we need to take them into account. But anyways, this said, I'm very proud to be associated with you as well.
I can think of one extremely annoying question, which is, why do you want to take us back to the dark ages and turn the taps off? Greta, fossil fuel companies are making record profits, as we said. There were an absurd number of lobbyists at COP last year. The next COP will be held in Dubai and run by an oil company CEO. It seems the phase out of fossil fuels may not even be a prominent part of the discussions. How can we make sure that phasing out fossil fuels is on the agenda?
Raise our voices. I mean, that's all we can do. We are not the ones in power. The ones in the world with the most powerful voices, with the most resources, are the ones who are destroying the world. It shouldn't be like that. And we have to do everything in our power to change that. But we must also not blame ourselves for this, because we are moving too slowly, or actually we're moving in the wrong direction. But that's not our fault. We are doing everything we can. We are doing everything we can to, for example, put mitigation on the agenda. And that's all we can do. We need many, many more. We need everyone in order to change everything. Until we are there, we can only make do of what we have, and continue to raise our voices, stand our ground, and not let ourselves be scared to silence. Continue organizing from our point of view. And by that, I don't mean that some people can do much, much more. Some people certainly do have the power and resources to do much more. And we are indeed watching them, and we are indeed putting much pressure on them to use their power. Mm-hmm.
I just want to add quickly, I think in the UK, our politicians are far too comfortable in their positions of power, and they forget that we are the ones who allow them to enter those positions of power in the first place. And so I think reminding them actually that we, the public, care about these issues and actually are watching what they're voting about day to day in Parliament when it pertains to the environment and climate is incredibly important. For me personally, My local MP is Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is not very environmentally friendly. And I write him letters all the time. I think he possibly hates me. But I write to him all the time and I say, I saw that you voted about this. We're not happy about it. I saw that you said this, not happy about it. Because I think that we need to remind our governments that this is an issue that is make or break for a lot of people. And if they don't do something about it, or if they're, actively backpedaling on things, that will, have an impact on their positions of power. That's all. I just want to remind you guys, I would totally recommend the letter thing, very effective. But I just want to remind you guys that there are, very easy things that you can do day to day as well.
Maya, I just want to say it's a massive flex to be hated by Jacob Rees-Mogg. Like a massive flex.
Definitely. I think the letter and also many other ways of campaigning and organising, as we all know, is constantly annoying these politicians day in and day out. Just being pretty much a nuisance. I call myself a joyful troublemaker, and that is constantly annoying politicians and showing them that we are watching. And I also think one of the most powerful tools that we have is knowing the power that we have and knowing the power that's within us, because a lot of people in power, a lot of fossil fuel executives and CEOs and politicians who are determined to put us further into climate breakdown and make decisions to line their pockets and prioritize profit over people and planet, they want us to believe that there is no hope. They want us to believe that we don't have power to change anything. And so it is so powerful and radical actually to realize that and have that awaken within ourselves, in that we all have power in so many different ways. This is an absolutely incredible panel and wonderful friends and people that I have in this community, and who all do action in so many different ways. And it just shows you that it truly can be anyone, and that there really is that power in all of us. And that is also why we keep doing what we do, because we know that we can really have an impact, and we know that we can create change, and we can continue being annoying.
Tori, I just want you, I want to ask you about an idea that I've heard you speak about, and it's really powerful, the idea of the social license for these fossil fuel companies to operate. Can you just touch on that and elaborate on it a bit?
Yeah, so many people have probably heard about how fossil fuel companies sponsor events or maybe sponsor different venues, and that gives them what we call a social license, and that's essentially a sort of social contract, as it were, to keep existing as they are. They may not necessarily be, saying fossil fuels are great when attached to a particular campaign, but inadvertently, by doing so, we allow them to keep existing and keep extracting. We've seen how the Science Museum, for instance, has been sponsored by some incredibly polluting organizations. And what that does is it allows for us to go, oh, well, they still have a reason to exist. They still have a reason to keep on with business as usual. And it's really insidious. And I feel like what we have to do as a society is we have to challenge that social license. In no future whatsoever do I want the fossil fuel companies to be part of our just transition. I want them to not exist. They shouldn't exist. These are companies that have made billions and billions in profit, and they have murdered frontline communities. They have known about the science since the 70s, and yet they still continue to delay climate action. It was a crisis of denial, now it's of delay. They know they can't deny the science, so they're buying themselves as much time as possible. And we see that happening. Some internal documents from the United States showed that Shell, besides trying to roll out renewables, was trying to buy themselves as much time using carbon capture methods, using marketing. They are not here for us. And please do not get it twisted thinking that they will save us, because they won't. We have seen this time and time again. In no future will we have fossil fuels leading the change.
Mya-Rose, Tori just mentioned the just transition. I wonder if you can share what exactly we mean by that. And I know that in the past you've spoken to Bangladesh as an example for that, what we really mean.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I talked about just transition a little bit before, and I think, I guess to reiterate, it is just this idea of it being people first. Like, I think for so long in the climate conversations, it's sort of been these narratives of, you know, the polar bears and the melting ice caps, and it for a long time wasn't really acknowledged that climate change isn't just an environmental issue, it is to an enormous degree a human issue. And so it's putting people, especially vulnerable people, first. And, like I said before, I talk about Bangladesh a lot purely because, you know, I've been there, I have family who live there, I hear about the way that the, you know, terrible environmental effect on, you know, farming and living and housing and everything. And I think so often there's almost this sense of superiority in the West where it's like almost going into other countries and being like, you know, we've had the epiphany, we've figured out that these things are bad, so now we're going to other countries and going like, oh, didn't you know these are bad, you just need to stop doing it. And I think a really basic example of how this just transition could play out is in terms of the textile industry in Bangladesh. Like, obviously Bangladesh is very, very famous for its garment industry, its garment factories. It makes a lot of the clothes that we all wear in the West. And when talking about fast fashion, it's very often just, we need to stop buying fast fashion. This is really bad for the environment, which it is. But there's very often, people aren't really thinking about that industry back in Bangladesh. Because, you know, for many women, that is a source of independence. It's completely transformed the economy. You know, it's incredibly important in many ways. And so rather than just in the West going, we're going to stop buying these clothes, it's also about going to Bangladesh and thinking about other ways that these factories could be used, other forms of employment, you know, economic motivation for people to transition away from things that are really bad for the environment. And I guess it's basically moving away from this almost Western condescension of like, we know best, and actually working collaboratively with people to figure out what the future will look like. And I think that's one of the reasons actually that I started a charity when I was 13, so in 2015, called Black to Nature, that was all about engaging ethnic minority people in the UK with nature and the countryside, but also the environmental movement, because at the time I felt like we weren't getting those diverse perspectives on what this transition, we weren't talking about just transitions then, but what the environmental transition should look like. You know, and there are so many kids that we work with, on nature camps and things like that, taking them out, engaging them with the outdoors, who, you know, have never really thought about climate change. That's not an issue that they think affects their day-to-day lives. But if you have a conversation saying, but don't you have family in Bangladesh or Sudan or wherever that are experiencing drought, who are experiencing their crops dying, they'll go, yeah, that's really bad. And so I think it also ties into this wider issue of figuring out how to engage more people in the climate movement who would never ever dream of thinking of themselves as environmentalists or people who care about nature or care about the outdoors or anything like that as well. And so I think, we were talking earlier about how environmental issues have to be intersectional, how we're thinking about all of these other social issues. And that is one of the reasons why that is so important. It's because the only reason we're even talking about a just transition now is because we have finally started to diversify slightly within the environmental movement. And that is how we actually create a sustainable future, because otherwise we're working towards, again, this sort of environmental utopia that will crumble apart as soon as any pressure is placed on it.
I think that's a really powerful point, Maya, and it's something that I also relate to. Having family in Jamaica, for context, I'm British American and Jamaican, triple citizenship. Having family in Jamaica and actually seeing the impacts of rising sea levels and understanding that that is a place that I call home, and it is a place that is going to be one of the most impacted by the climate crisis, and those of us from the diaspora, that is definitely something we can connect to. Yeah.
And Daphne, yes, movements forward in terms of diversity, but perhaps disabled communities all too often excluded. Can you speak to that and share how disabled communities are often disproportionately impacted?
Yeah, as a disabled person, I myself have experienced fluctuations of how the climate crisis affects me. We've talked about the proliferation of extreme weather events just over the last couple of months. And when we think about these events, we think about people having to evacuate rapidly. And unfortunately, most times, disabled folks are forgotten in these evacuation procedures. One, because they're made from an able-bodied perspective, but two, because when you're having to evacuate rapidly and you only have seconds, maybe minutes, you're having to leave behind things like walkers and wheelchairs and life-saving devices, things that allow us to thrive and succeed. I think also when we talk about air pollution, there are many disabled individuals who we systemically live in poverty. So trying to have access to an air purifier is a luxury, and we oftentimes are relegated to areas of communities that are on the outskirts because we still live in a society that isn't made for us to thrive and succeed. So to get to our doctor's appointments, to get to the grocery store, to get to even see friends, it takes maybe 2 to 3 hour trip. And here in London, only 30% of the tube system is accessible. So if you're trying to get disabled individuals to use more climate-friendly mode of transportation, the only way we can do that if it's actually accessible to us. Not to mention that disabled individuals are often villainized within the climate conversation. We all know the sort of obsession with plastic straw bans, and I say obsession because of two things. One, it completely erases individuals, especially disabled individuals, who need single-use plastic and straws in particular to thrive and receive nourishment. I myself have dexterity issues, so I depend on a straw to be able to drink my beverages and enjoy meals with friends and simply enjoy food. I love food a lot, so I want to be able to eat it. And there's nothing worse than feeling like you're shamed by someone for asking for a plastic straw. And I say obsession, secondly, because campaigns like banning plastic straws, I think, serve as a massive insidious distraction to the real root cause of the climate crisis, which is the fossil fuel industry. And by pitting communities against each other, we're never going to be able to solve the climate crisis that way. And I also believe that disabled individuals are some of the best fit individuals to solve the climate crisis. As Dami was saying, in marginalized communities, we have the solutions already. Disabled people exist in a world where we've had to mitigate and adapt to pretty much everything because, again, able-bodied individuals run society. And that force of adaptation and mitigation, but more importantly, the community that keeps us safe is vital. I've had friends where we share medication with each other. My wheel's broken, we share wheelchairs with each other. We are better than Amazon. We allow each other to thrive and succeed. And it is those very same qualities that the climate crisis is so desperately in need of employing. And I think it's not even so much about having disabled people within climate conversations, but it's really going into our communities and saying, universal design is already benefiting everyone. How many folks took elevators today? Elevators benefits all people of all abilities. Curb cuts benefits everyone. There's nothing worse than walking with pounds of groceries and having to lift your cart up a curb. And I think the more we start looking at a world that isn't just fit for us to thrive, the further we will be in terms of creating more disability equity. I mean, disabled people are 15% of our global population. There are 1 billion disabled people on the planet, yet somehow, in a very strange way, we are still a community on the front lines from the sidelines.
I want to bring in an audience question. I really like this audience question. It's very inspiring. This is Leonore. It's very inspiring to see that many of the prominent climate activists throughout the world today are girls and women. Do you agree? And if so, do you have an idea of why women seem to be grappling with this issue more than men? That is for anyone who wants to answer it. I know, right?
I think it's really important to highlight that this isn't a new phenomenon. The burden of the environmental movement has fallen on women for decades. Even looking back to the 60s, it was women who are leading the charge, and I think there's a few reasons for that. Firstly, there are these studies that are coming out that are basically showing that caring for the environment is seen as too feminine by a lot of men. And I think it ties into this wider thing of caring about the planet, caring about not dying, I guess, being, seen as feminine and nurturing and gentle. I think also it's these wider community bonds and things like that that I think historically in general have often fallen on women, and so it's often women who come together, pull other people together to try and make things happen. But I'm sure the others have more to add.
I think it's not surprising that the burden of the climate crisis falls on women, but the people who run fossil fuel industries are mostly men.
It's called petromasculinity. It's a thing.
And it's a thing that needs to be destroyed. And I think I also think about the way that a lot of times the earth is personified as a woman, as a mother, right? Our Mother Earth. And the toxic masculinity that is so rampant within our culture and society that it feels unfathomable for men and male-defining individuals to sit down and be like, it's okay to love our earth. And I think it's also this thing about caring for community, caring for each other, this nurturing that happens where sort of you become, women are mostly domesticated, right? And this role reversal sort of breaks the capitalist system, and capitalism is trying very hard to stay alive. So I think it isn't until we can sort of break down those barriers of who gets to be safe and who gets to take care of each other that we're not going to really see a role reversal in the way that not just the climate space, but the majority of social movements are led.
There's a quote I love by Mary Robinson: "Climate change is a man-made problem with a feminist solution." I always come back to that. It's brilliant.
I love that quote.
Another quote is Amitabh Ghosh. I'm sure you've heard it, but that the climate crisis is also a crisis of imagination. So I want to speak a bit to the way that we're talking about this problem. And I want to bring in another audience question. This one is from Paul. I'd love to hear the panel's thoughts on if it is even appropriate to adopt a positive tone in campaigning and activism, given the urgency of the problems we face. I think it's a really interesting one, and it's one I personally grapple with a lot. What is the balance between urgency and optimism, and how do we bring people along on the journey with us?
I think positive framing, I think it definitely has a place in people seeing that there are solutions that we're working towards, because oftentimes we are very essentially and vitally calling for things to stop, for example, fossil fuel extraction. And I also think it is actually really engaging in a different way to see people with positive framing or campaigns for positive framing about the solutions that we're working towards, and showing people that actually a sustainable future is good for all of us. It is also a social justice issue, and actually that having things like greener cities, having clean air, insulated houses, all of these things, having people having more access to urban gardens and local food sourcing, this is actually a great thing for all of us. I think that is really great for people to see. But also, something that you mentioned, Alice, that I do grapple with is this line between like positive and negative framing of the climate crisis. And for me, I think it's really important to have that balance where we show the reality of what's happening and the crisis that we're facing, so people understand the seriousness of the situation that we are in and that we have to take action now. But what that negative framing can often do is engage people and cause awareness, and by bringing in positive framing, that can also mobilize people into action. And something I speak about a lot is hope, but hope is something for me that is created and built with community and by rising together. And I feel like in the media, a lot of the time when we see the climate crisis covered, it is very much in more of a doomism lens. And it's covered as something that all hope is lost and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it, and that this is how things are, and in a way that makes it seem like it's too late to take action. And I feel like that negative framing can really, climate doomism is so dangerous because that it can just paralyze action. And I feel that instead, by actually showing the people that are rising and these transformative stories and the stories of people that are coming together and actually creating incredible action and showing the solutions and the things that we can do is so powerful in mobilizing people. And also, instead of framing the crisis just as something that is happening and something that we are just facing, it's actually something that is the direct result of decisions that are being made by fossil fuel executives, by politicians, by leaders to actively put us further into climate breakdown. And once we see that these are it's the result of decisions, then we can also see that we can rise and change those decisions. And so I think that balance between the positive and the negative is actually so crucial in actually mobilizing people and making us all realize that we truly do have the power to change it.
It really makes me laugh thinking about this, because Domi talks a lot about climate joy, and she's Barbie and I'm Oppenheimer. Quite literally.
Very much.
Because I talk a lot about anger. And there are scientific studies which actually show that anger is one of the most powerful catalysts for change. And often when I've taken action or when I've tried to campaign for climate justice, it's been from a place of deep-seated anger, like the kind of unshakable anger that you just cannot ignore. And I think it's a survival mechanism, and I think we need to lean into it. I do also think that we need to understand that anger can be from a very deep place of love, but I would also encourage us not to shy away from those so-called heavy emotions that we really want to push down. Far too often, they are literally our body telling us to wake up and do something, and we have to find ways to harness those emotions so that we can take action. And I write a lot about eco-anxiety and how it can transform into climate doomism, which is this nihilistic belief that there is nothing that we can do. I think that's fundamentally wrong. There is so much that we can do. And history has shown us, as with Stop Cambo, that we can stop and end things if we try. But it does take community. I think that far too often, we do feel individualized in this struggle. We are made to come up on stages like this quite often. I think this is our third or fourth engagement this weekend, which is quite exhausting. And I've gotten to the point, I've noticed as the week's gone on, I've just been like, I'm not going to sugarcoat anything anymore. And we do need to wake up. This is all of our responsibilities. We have a duty to one another, to those who are most vulnerable, to those specifically on the front lines of the climate crisis in the global south. We are probably some of the most privileged people on this earth, and we have a duty to do right by our global community.
I just want to talk really quickly about the concept of doomism as well, because I think how hopeful or positive we should be is something I grapple with a lot. But I think the context of where doomism has come from is so important in conversations like this, because It's kind of come out of nowhere in the last 5 to 10 years. It's not the way that people used to think about environmental issues. And I think for context, as many of you know, I guess to backtrack a bit, the carbon footprint was also not something that came out of nowhere. That was, although it's sort of entered the space as sort of something that we can keep track of to try and save the planet, it was actually something that was invented by a think tank that was funded by BP, essentially in order to distract us, to sort of make us focus on our individual action rather than community-based action that could actually create change. And that was really effective for a really long time. In fact, for decades, this narrative of individualism really did distract us. But recently, that hasn't been so effective. I think, people have started banding together much more. And now the narrative that's sort of been threaded in with conversations around climate instead of individualism is doomism. They have decided and are actively funding doomism because they have realized that making people feel frozen and isolated and helpless, like they can't do anything, is the best way to stop people from doing anything. And that is how they maintain their profits and their power. And so I think while taking a sort of overly hopeful stance on these things without acknowledging the reality of what we're dealing with on this planet is obviously unhelpful, unconducive, it's not right. But I also think maintaining hope, especially in a community, I think that is kind of very powerful and very radical in and of itself.
So, and so the fundamental question becomes, like, is fear a motivating factor in climate action? You said anger was for you. Greta, I wonder what were the emotions that motivated you into this work?
I think in the beginning it was fear and anger, some kind of mixture of those, but also a sense of, you don't have this word in English, but jävlar anamma. It means kind of, I can't translate it. It's like, let's get this done, kind of. But in a more angry way. Yeah.
We have one of those in Cantonese. It's ga yao, which is really tragic because it translates to add oil.
So good. So much at the root of the crisis is, of course, the value system that is so dominant across the global north. Aedy, Viviam, I wonder if you can speak to Indigenous value systems and cosmovisions and how they intersect with the need for climate action.
Creo que uno de los retos de la comunicación, quiero un poco amarrarlo con tu pregunta, la pregunta de antes, es esta comunicación del cambio climático, y creo que los lugares comunes son miedo, rabia, y yo he escuchado, digamos, a personas que me han dicho es precisamente lo que me aleja. Yo no quiero levantarme en el día y escuchar que existe esta posibilidad latente y tampoco quiero asumir responsabilidad. Yo creo que el público que ha venido hoy me emociona me asusta y me emociona en el sentido de que creo que son personas que en algún punto encontraron en ese panel parte de esa respuesta, parte de ese acercamiento, parte de esa reafirmación, y eso, digamos, para no irnos muy lejos y encontrar motivación en muchos lados y en muchas partes, esto también es parte de esa motivación que encuentro.
Well, one of the challenges in communication, and to tie this back to one of your questions from a moment ago, is that whenever we talk about climate change, the common feeling is anger or fear. And I've had too many people just say to me that I don't want to wake up aware of the possibility that something like this might happen, or I don't want to have the responsibility of doing this. But when I come in contact with an audience like this one today, that I find both scary and moving, I think that you come because you find in a panel like this answers or closeness, and sometimes it's very difficult to maintain this type of motivation.
Y frente a lo que también nos genera esa parte de esperanza, el lugar de donde vengo y como decías, el valor que tienen las visiones de los pueblos indígenas para frenar esta crisis climática, es parte también de esa sensatez, razón y certeza de que estamos haciendo un trabajo importante en nuestros lugares. Para puntualizarlo, la Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, por ejemplo, es uno de esos lugares cuya biodiversidad es irreemplazable en el mundo. Es de especial relevancia para nosotros cuidarlo. Cómo la cosmovisión sustenta precisamente estas prácticas es, en principio, hay puntos sagrados, digamos, alrededor de lo que se conoce como la línea negra, y nosotros, desde nuestro rol en la comunidad, que nos denominamos hermanos mayores, es precisamente proteger esos puntos sagrados. Nos hemos ido desplazando a las zonas más altas por violencia, la violencia de la colonización fue un periodo de estos, y ahora es apremiante empezar a recuperar las zonas en las que históricamente habíamos habitado, y esa es parte de la estrategia política que se establece desde mi comunidad.
So, and then to talk about hope and where I come from, I think that part of the values that we have in our Indigenous worldview and cosmovision, there's this sensibility, this sense of certainty that we are doing important work. So where I come from in Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta is an incredible, important place in terms of biodiversity, and it's irreplaceable in the world. So we have the responsibility of looking after it. In the black line, that is the demarcation for our territory, there are lots of sacred places that join the black line together. And we, as the community, as the elder brothers, are the responsible ones. We are responsible for protecting these sacred places. We now live in the higher lands because we lost of our territory to colonization, and we are working as part of our political activism as well to recover the lower grounds so we can continue protecting them.
Y algo que tenemos en común los pueblos indígenas es partir de esta intención de tener una cosmovisión que da sentido a lo que hacemos, y no hay un sentimiento de conversión como si lo ha habido en otras religiones, de si no piensas como yo, entonces te mato, básicamente, pero si no piensas como yo, tienes la responsabilidad de pensar como yo, y yo creo que es algo valioso que tienen los pueblos indígenas, y no hay esta sensación mesiánica de conversión hacia ningún lado, sino que hacemos la tarea y la hacemos en nuestras comunidades, en nuestros territorios, y eso es supremamente valioso para protegerlo. Entendiendo eso, también quiero hablar del pueblo del Ecuador, el hermano pueblo de Ecuador, que el 20 de agosto tiene sus votaciones para el Yasuní. Me parece importante hacerle mención porque creo que ahí es donde recobra sentido esa pregunta de qué es esto que generamos desde los pueblos indígenas para protegerlo. Y parece que existe una suerte de mencionar y hacer una demanda aquí en el panel y que eventualmente podamos hablarnos en 2 años y decir, pasó esto y es positivo.
And I think that there's something that is common to all indigenous peoples, and that is that we have this cosmovision that guides what we do and that gives sense to what we do. There's a convergence of it, unlike different other religions that tend to think the way, if you don't think like me, then I will go and kill you. We are not following a tendency to convert others. We're not seeking to convert others. Actually, we want to do our job and we want to protect the environment and we want to protect our lands. And I want to mention our brothers in Ecuador, who on the 20th of August are going to vote on a very important matter for the Chasumir Reserve. And going back to the question that you asked, what indigenous people are doing to protect the environment, this is one of the things that we are doing, and I want to mention it today in this panel, hoping that in 2 years' time, I can come and tell you about all the things that we did to protect it.
Y para finalizar, no me va a tomar mucho tiempo más, yo sé, estamos cortos, pero les contaba entonces que esta votación popular es si continúan o no la explotación minera en el ITT bloque 40, si no estoy mal, bloque 43, perdón. Y me gustaría que enunciáramos todos hoy un canto, pero entonces traducción y lo hago.
And just to end, I know that we don't have much time. This popular vote that I was talking about is to stop the mining exploitation of Block 43. So I would like to invite you to join me in a chant that I will share with you now.
It's famous. Keep it in the ground, let's keep it in the ground. ¿Lo hacemos juntos? Sí. 1, 2, 3. Keep it in the ground, let's keep it in the ground. Keep it in the ground, let's keep it in the ground. Again, keep it in the ground, let's keep it in the ground. Los escucharán en el pueblo de Ecuador.
I'm sure they will be able to hear you back in Ecuador as well.
Daphne, I want to come to you on, I guess we talk so much about the cost to the planet of climate activism, but I also know that there is a cost to you guys as individuals. What are the sacrifices you make through this work, and also what is there to be gained?
Oh, wow. There's so many places you can start. I mean, and I'm glad you asked this question because I already got my tears out yesterday, so I'm not going to cry today. My makeup looks too nice for that. And I think a lot of us sacrifice our health and our time to be with family, and whether that family be family that you choose or family that you're related to by blood, those connections are vital. For me, and everyone on this panel knows this, but for me, the last time I was here with all these amazing people, I had cancer and I didn't know. It's been, today's July 30th, right? You think I would know the day of this very important panel. Today's July 30th, which means in about 4 days' time will equal 5 months since I finished my last chemotherapy.
Woo!
Thank you. And I think something that I had to grapple with a lot during that time was, did I ignore the signs my body was giving me because I was so committed to doing this work? And I don't know necessarily what that answer is yet, but I think it leans more yes than no, and I grieve that answer for myself. And I know many of us on this panel have navigated similar traumas and similar struggles. And it's hard because this work requires so much of ourselves, every bit of who we are, that we oftentimes leave nothing for ourselves in return. And I think that's why we get so angry about questions like hope. Because if people knew how truly sleep deprived we are and how often we forget to eat or drink water, if there weren't amazing producers around at events literally telling us, sit down and eat food, I think we probably wouldn't eat. And I think it's also about how much our family sacrifice as well. This work, we've all had the privilege of getting platforms doing this work, and a lot of the hate that we receive doesn't just come to us, it comes to people that we care about, people that we love, and communities and people that we love. So I think, yes, there's a lot of sacrifice, there's a lot that we've lost, things that I see other young people doing that I'm like, man, I wish I could be doing that as well. But I think also in that sacrifice is just the possibility of what could be better, and that keeps you moving forward, right? And also, as I was talking about chosen family, we have family here and so many of our other comrades and allies in this movement. But it truly is a massive sacrifice, and I just hope that it'll be worth it.
Greta, yesterday you mentioned you've left school, you'll be at university soon. You said you'll still be striking. Can you tell me about the sense of responsibility you hold also to continue this work?
I think all of us who are in this fight have a very, very big burden on our shoulders. There is so much responsibility that falls on us because there are so few who are engaged in this fight. And of course, that's way too much responsibility for people like us. And of course, there are people around the world who have much more responsibility, who face much bigger consequences than we do. But that's it shouldn't have to be that way, but that's the situation we are in right now. And as we said earlier, we simply have no other option than to continue. So that's what we're gonna do. But I urge every one of you in here to join us, to join the climate movement, because we need every single one of you. Everyone can contribute in different ways, and we need every possible skill and every person in this.
I want to end with an audience question, and this comes from Abigail. I'm 14 years old. Sometimes I feel like I'm losing all hope that we can turn this around, and I want to give up. I feel that maybe it would be better if we just let humanity die out and the world regenerate itself. Can you give me some ideas so that I can take action and restore my hope that is all not lost? So dare I ask about hope, but could you just share one message to involve young people and to encourage them to join the movement, as well as every other generation that is sat in this auditorium? Who wants to share that final message?
I don't have an answer to that, but I do want to give agency to what that the person, the name Abigail, the agency wants to give agency to what Abigail is feeling. We all feel that as well in various levels, and there are millions of young people across this planet that feel that as well. And I think that's also where you can find hope, knowing that if you're sitting awake at 3 a.m. being like, oh my gosh, the planet is burning, what am I supposed to do? You're not alone. I'm probably doing the exact same thing. And that may not be a glamorous solution, but like Tori said, a lot of our work is not glamorous. And I think there's a misconception that unless you're doing a strike with millions of people or a part of a protest that has recognizable names, or you're not passing pieces of legislation, that your climate activism is invaluable. And that's simply not the case. Going into your community and simply having conversations about the climate crisis is powerful. And you don't have to, I think we're in this like weird space of activism, especially youth activism, where we're skirting the line between activists and organizers and then pseudo-influencers, and none of us signed up to be any of those people. That was never our intention in doing this work. We simply just want a home to live in. And I think a lot of young people Abigail's age might see our platforms and go on our social medias and see that we have lots of followers and blue check marks and be like, man, if I'm not doing that, I'm not doing enough. But that's not what the climate crisis is about, and that's not what climate justice is about. You are valid in your own story and who you are as a person. And as long as you share your story and you use the power of your words to get out there, I think that that's what matters the most.
I heard you say yes. Do you want to add something, Mya-Rose? Sorry, go for it.
Yeah, I just want to say quickly as well, like, I think it's so easy to fall into, especially when you hear, you know, we're constantly bombarded with terrible things going on everywhere. I think it's so easy to fall into the mindset of, you know, humans are a plague on Earth. We're like leeches sucking the life out of the planet, whatever. And I really want to highlight that that's not true. And actually, the majority of people around the world are amazing and lovely and kind and care about their family and their community and the land that they live on. And I think for me, like, I guess to go to that question of hope, like, I think that that is the most important thing to remember. We're not fighting humanity. We're not fighting our neighbors. We're fighting corporations and greed, and the choice that's made every day to continue sucking the life out of the planet.
Just to lastly quickly add on the brilliant things that have been said by Daphne and Maya, there's also the fact that you don't have to be perfect, and the idea of perfectionism, it just doesn't exist. There's no such thing as a perfect activist. And as Daphne said, whether you are someone who finds yourself holding a megaphone or protesting, whether you're an artist, a creative, a musician, a storyteller who touches people's hearts in that way, whether you are someone who really loves spreadsheets, whether you are someone who, like, there's whatever skills or experience you have, it is so needed and it is so valued, and there is no way to be an activist. You just have to act, and this movement, like we've said today, does need everyone, and it needs all of us acting in so many different ways.
So, Abigail, don't lose hope. Join the movement. Guys, thank you so much. So many of us know what's happening and the extent of the crisis, but too few have the courage to take action like you are. I'm very, very grateful, and thank you for this evening.
Alice, I just wanted to quickly give thanks to our interpreters over here and Vivi's interpreter.
And thank you to you, Alice, for holding space for all of us.
Thank you, Alice.
So before we go, I know there's something that we would love to have the audience be involved with. Over to you, Tori.
So if everyone stands up, please.